struggling 4 years, and we were there about 11 years, but it looked like it was going to turn around for a time, but wasn't able to seem like get a strong core of dedicated people. But anyway, I can't tell 11-year story in a few minutes, but anyway, that's but I got to searching myself and looking, and I decided I wasn't really satisfied. I know as a young minister, I remember being hungry, thirsty after God and wanting more, and raising a family, working full time and pastoring, and just God gave me a place to work. I feel like I was in God's place, in God's will. Down through the years, I've seen God do some great things. But I remember that as a young minister, when I was going to, you're going to do something for God. And so I began to rededicate and reconsecrate. It's never too late to get down to business with God. And so that journey, as I have begun to pray and seek the Lord, I've asked the Lord to let me walk with Him. Not just Him walk with me and bless what I decide, but me walk with God and do what He decides. There's a difference. And us making all the decisions and getting God to bless it and Him walking with us, so to speak, and us really walking with God. And I've been hungry to see God work, to see God move, to see God heal, to see God save. And so as we begin to, I set my, when I go to camp meeting and meetings, I like to ask the Lord to speak to my heart. I was in Prague a couple years ago at their meeting, Brother Brock's meeting in Prague, Oklahoma. Brother Ingram was preaching that day in the day service, and he wasn't the main speaker, but he was preaching in the morning service, and he preached on, He giveth power to the faint. And but the part I got out of that, the Lord spoke to me. He said, you cannot help anybody if you're wore out and just struggling yourself, you're faint yourself. He said, you have got to give God time. You've got to give God time. And I went home and started consistent prayer life. From the, it's really. I've always tried to pray, but it'd get away from you if you don't just make up your mind. So I decided I would have to give God time. And at the first of this year, I decided to try to increase that time. But I still wasn't seeing everything I wanted. I wasn't getting, after 2 years of continuous searching, seeking more, wanting more of God, wanting to see God work, wanting to see God move, I was still seemed like struggling. So I changed it. My son gave me his old phone. I ended up having a phone that would do a little more, and Nathaniel added me to this group, and so I kind of throw some things out there to them. How do you get? And one of the things that came up in our discussions, my son actually started, my youngest son, he was here, I think, a year or so back. He actually started this group to help himself as a young minister he calls it iron sharpeneth iron. And so one thing that came back with as we were discussing and trying to encourage each other and was one word. I'll say it with one word: fasting. And I knew, when I was a young minister, the way I reached the anointing was prayer and fasting. I had to pay a price of pushing back my plate and going and begging God. There was a period of time there that, but we get settled in and we get used to being able to go and get it done and do it, and sometimes that's the last thing we want to get started back at. It's not fun to push back the plate and put days of fasting and just seeking the Lord. But Jesus, I preached a message on them fasting at my home church because we were in a little church. I ended up at another church. I thought I was going to retire from pastoring. I've been pastoring about 30 years, but here I am at a little church in Arkansas that needs revival. I told him, I said, here we are. We've got to make a decision. We have got to decide to do something. Yeah. Because we've already buried 4 of the 14 that was there when we came, whatever. We buried 4. So we're down to around 10. So, but I told them, aging congregation, we'd have one young person, one little child, but other than that, it's above 50 and close to 60. So, and then it jumps to 70 and 80. So here we are. I said, we have got to decide to do something, because if we do not decide to do something, time is going to make that decision for us. We'll be gone. We've got a nice little church, got a nice fellowship hall, nice area. It's not, but it'll be empty. Right. We've got to decide to get a hold of God for revival. We've got to decide to try to get a hold of God for revival and see it. So I preached, we got to pray. We got to pray. We got to ask God for revival. And last week or so, I preached to him, well, we're going to have to start fasting. How do you have revival? Well, I don't know any other way but the old-fashioned way. I mean, I know there's modern ways of getting people's attention. I don't know it's necessarily wrong to use anything you know how to use to get people to come. But still, as long as it's within reason. But I don't think there is ever going to be any substitute for God's plan of prayer and fasting. See God work, to see God move. Anyway, that's not really my subject now. But look at the book of Job again tonight, Job chapter 14. So remember the church at Umpire. Pray that God will send us revival. Oh, that thou wouldest, Job 14 and 13, oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret, till thy wrath be past, that thou wouldest appoint me a set time, and remember me. You may be seated. Appoint me a set time, and remember me. Does anybody here just want to be forgot about? We'd kind of like for some folks to remember us. I want to get well enough acquainted with my grandchildren that when I'm gone, they remember Grandpa. I want to be, but anyway, but this place here, he said, God, if you would just set me a time and remember me. Yeah. For God to remember us, I read of a man in the book of Nehemiah that said several times, he would say, Nehemiah 5 and 19, he said, think upon me, Lord, for good. Yeah. God, think about me. In chapter 13, in verse 14, 22, and 31, he said, remember me, and he would say something that he had done. He said, God, remember me for this. Remember me for this. God, remember me. Yeah. And the Bible tells us in Acts chapter 3 that he would send times of refreshing. So there is something to do, I'm talking about remembering and tying together with time. Set a time to remember me. Times of refreshing come from the presence of the Lord. There's some times of refreshing that God has scheduled. Yes, right. I believe God has times of refreshing scheduled for every church. Right. Yeah. And I think if we really seek him, he'll send some in between. Yeah. But he has times of refreshing that he will come and send times of refreshing from his presence. Yes, oh, to be remembered. When I was a little boy, Mom and Dad got us some little ukuleles. I must have been 4 years old. My older brother must have been about 6. And so we learned to play a little song. We'd stand up by the pulpit, and we'd play a little song. And I guess I knew something about the changes. I knew she showed me that, and I guess I could kind of make through it. I forgot them later, but I mean, and my older brother, I think he probably knew a little bit better than I did. But she'd tune him up, and we'd stand there and with them old ukuleles. They got better tuners on them now. Them old ones wouldn't stand tuning for nothing, but. So we'd stand there by the pulpit and we'd sing, do Lord, oh do remember me. Y'all remember that song? Do Lord, oh do remember me. Do Lord, oh do remember me. Way beyond the blue. Oh God, is there a hunger in your heart for God to set you a time and say, there's some things that we're going through. There's some things that we're facing. There's some things that we're dealing with. We could make it a little bit better if we just knew there was a time out yonder that God had set. If we could just feel like there's a time down there, that'd be the end of it. It'd be over then. The trial would be done. It'd be over then. Oh, the Bible said, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial. We're just sent to try you. But after a while, Lord, there's got to be a place where you say it's enough. Yeah. In the book of Genesis, chapter 8, the Bible speaks of Noah. And in chapter 7, we see God speaking to Noah and telling him to 7:1, Lord said to Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. For I've seen thee righteous before me in this generation. So God told Noah to go into the ark, and then God shut him in verse. Shut the door after he got in the ark. Verse 24 says the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. 150 days that it went by. That's nearly 6 months. And I had the church that we're right next to youngest brother goes. Nathaniel's the youngest. The next to the youngest, Mom and Dad had two families. The baby was 10, and Thomas and Nathaniel. So I'm 17 years older than Nathaniel. My older brother's 19 years. There's 19 years between the oldest and youngest. So they kind of had two sets of families. So after that, the older was a grown and married, and out of the house, they had two more to raise. But we went there to Coweta across the creek. Brother Don Tabor was in revival there. And again, I prayed again. I said, God, would you speak to me tonight? And I was really in a turmoil. I had questions. I felt like I needed some answers. I needed God to talk to me. That was that was about the time I was making the decision to move to Arkansas, and it just seemed like a big change, big difference, changing job, moving clear away, changing, I've been on the same job for 18 years. How would y'all like to upset that apple cart? But anyway, it was just a big decision. So we went over there, and Brother Don was talking about Noah when he was sending forth that dove and that raven out of the ark. He said, the reason why that God sent that raven and that dove out of the ark? It's because he had questions. We have questions. Noah had questions. Just like we have questions, Noah had questions. What's going on? I've been here 150 days and it's quit raining out there after 150 days. It's not moving now. But I don't know what's going on out there. I can see up. I got a window up here, but what is going on? And Noah had questions. And I got to look at this, and also that same service to finish that, God speaking. There's the Holy Ghost interpretation. You've got questions. Of course, Brother Don is preaching that God's going to speak. God's got the answers. I went with questions. I didn't get the answer to my questions, but I got told that God has the answer. I'm still waiting on some of those answers. But God has them. That's what I found. God has those answers. And you've got questions, the message that went along something like that line, you've got questions, God will speak.
Yes, amen.
But I got to look at this after that, and in chapter 8 it said, and God remembered Noah.
Yeah.
But what the Bible does not say, and let us know for sure, is that Noah had any idea that God was remembering him. God spoke to Noah in chapter 7, but you see no more. God, it's very possible that all those 150 days, he hadn't heard God speak.
Yeah.
He'd heard the wind blow and the ark toss it around. And he did what he had to do day by day. And he had that window. You ever heard that little song? God spake unto Noah and told him to build an ark. The Lord knew well the vessel, perilous be and dark. So God said, build a window without look toward the sky. So when you're sad and lonely, you'll see me standing by. Oh, the storms may come, but fear not. Oh, Noah, I am nigh and through the upper window. You'll see me standing by. You know, that's a wonderful song. You know, to think we know that God's way, that God's near, but you know the possibility is that Noah never did see God. That God didn't speak during that time. And you know what was happening? He had all kinds of questions, but he was having to walk by faith. He stepped on that ark, and he heard God slam the door, and there he was, and everything started changing.
Yeah.
And the ark started floating. But thank God, God remembered Noah.
Yeah.
We know that God remembered Noah. I don't know if Noah knew it. That's my point. We know that God remembered Noah. And he began to make the wind blow and speed up the drying of the earth so Noah could get off that ark.
Yeah.
But Noah, with his question, was sending forth a dove. He was sending forth a raven. But you know, God didn't, I don't guess it mattered if he wanted to send forth a raven. It didn't matter if he sent forth a dove. But Noah didn't have to, because God was going to speak again.
Yeah.
And in verse number 15 of chapter 8, and God spake unto Noah, saying, go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Yeah. Oh yes, sometimes we get so shook up and troubled. We've got so many questions. But I think we can be pretty sure of this. If we live for God and stay with God, he will speak again. God will speak again to your need, to your problem, your situation. God will speak again. And the chances are he's already remembering you. He's already remembering you like he didn't know. He's already remembering your need. He already knows about it. And he's already caused the wind of his spirit to begin to blow. And he's working in the situation already, making the wind to blow. And it's already beginning to move. And you're doing things in your questions, trying to figure out, trying to find, and you know, that's what we do. When we have questions, we do things. Probably nothing wrong with doing what we can. I mean, the Bible don't criticize him for doing this, but God was going to tell him when to get off the ark.
Yeah.
If he wouldn't have had to send forth the dove or the raven. And I thought of the promises of God, you know, appoint me a set time. There was a time set when God was going to speak.
Yeah.
God had already remembered Noah, and the time when he could go off that ark, it was a set time. Praise the Lord. And I thought of the promises of God and dealing with this. I believe, and I'm going to put it this way, if I can make myself clear here tonight, that the promises of God have a set time of fulfillment. What are you saying? When you meet the conditions of the promise, God sets a time. For example, they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, what's the rest of that? Shall be filled. That means there is a set time when that hunger and that thirsting after God will begin to overflow your life and begin to fill your heart, and you'll begin to be filled with the fullness of God because you have hungered and thirsted after God. Another one, Matthew chapter 7, ask, and you shall receive. So from the time of the asking in faith, there's a appointed time, a set time, when ye shall receive.
Yeah.
Seek, there's a time appointed when you begin to seek God that ye shall find. Seek and ye shall knock, and it shall be opened. I believe that God, when we begin to fulfill the conditions of the promise, God sets a time. The problem with us, we don't understand how to wait on God. We let our faith begin to collapse. We let our faith our doubts begin to assail us. And the election doubters that John Bunyan told about in Holy War, they begin to upset us. And these election doubters and salvation doubters and all these doubters begin to bombard our spirit until we just don't really, we get so bombarded by doubt. We lose sight of the promise. But when God makes a promise, when we fulfill the condition, he sets a time to fulfill it. I thought of Jacob and his sorrow. In Genesis chapter 42 and verse 36. And Jacob their father said to them, have you believed in my children? Joseph is not, and Simeon is not. You will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. You ever feel that way? Everything seems like it's against me. Man, I got to go, in the times when you're trying your best and your soul is drawn out, I went to work with my soul crying out, God, oh God, oh God, oh God. I just needed to get somewhere to pray, but I had to go to work. That's against us, We think, and sometimes that time, that best time, and your soul is longing after God, but yet there's so many things that are against it. We need revival. We want revival, but we get sick. We get tired. All these things are against us. And Jacob just really, he was looking at, he had already lost Joseph. And though Joseph had he had the same dream Joseph had, but he lost sight of it. I don't know if Joseph down through time remembered his dream all the while he kept him going. But Jacob, I don't know if the back of his mind he remembered that dream, or if he thought he was dead. He thought he was dead.
Yeah.
But while he was saying this, while he was talking about this, and talking about everything against us, and looking at the blessing he'd already give up on, and he just got so discouraged he felt like he's getting ready to go downhill some more, and things is going to get worse. I'll tell you, the devil would like to convince you that things is going to get worse, when God is already remembering your need. While Jacob was saying, all these things are against me, over there in Egypt land, his son, his blessing he'd already give up on, was over there getting some things together, getting the wagons packed and ready to come to carry it. There was an appointed time. There was an appointed time when the wagons was going to arrive at Jacob's door. And all this time he was just about to feel like life's so bad, it's getting worse, it'll never be good again, it'll never be better. And here I am, and all these things are against me. But God was remembering Jacob, and he was getting ready to turn things around in such a way. And we read down there in 45 and 21. And the children of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons, according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way.
Oh, praise God. Thank you, Jesus.
They had a set time. They was going to take a certain amount of time to get there. But there was already a time set. And Jacob was getting ready to be remembered. Oh, after all them years of sorrowing, he said, I'm going to go down to my grave and saw. Didn't happen. No, he had some pretty good years there last year. He got to visit with Joseph probably several times. Bless his sons and see his grandsons. I mean, it wasn't the way it was going. He was picturing it. Sometimes we look at it and we get so discouraged. We feel like we're going to finish out our course. We're going to finish out. It's not nothing good going to happen. We're not going to see anything happen. It's not going to ever be any better than this. It's just going to go downhill from there. I mean, the devil would like to tell us that up high, well, you buried 3 and 4 already. Before God moves, it's not going to happen. But I tell you what, it could be that God has already remembered. He may have some folks picked out. He may have some young. I was talking to Brother Cooper from down over in Arkansas and around Hell Mountain. Their church had got down, aging congregation got down in number. He said God sent revival. He said God began to save young men. Establish them. I mean, really save them and establish them in the church. And before it was over, they had 21. They just built a new church over. I guess it's still going. This has been 20, 30 years ago, and now they built a new church. So I guess they held on to their turnaround. They held on that growth. Brother Shoecraft was preaching to us about a church back in Virginia, and he lost most of his church to the Branham movement back in the 70s. He's so discouraged. Just had him and the deacon, maybe one more. He was just, he's told his wife, said, we're just going to have to give it up. Said, we'll hold on a few more weeks. Said, we're just going, if not something happens, we're going to. He picked up a hitchhiker one day, and the hitchhiker said, are you a ministry? He said, well, that's what they, he's so beat down he couldn't even stand. Oh, yeah, that's what they call me. He's just discouraged. But the man said, yeah, that's kind of what I was wanting to find out. Said, you can let me off here. He said, well, there's nothing here. Oh, that's fine. Let me out. So he let him out, and he looked around. There wasn't nobody there. He went back to see where he went. He couldn't find him. A few services after that, I think the way, if I remember right, he was kneeling down, and this door opened, and this man come. Same one he picked up on the road. Come up and laid his hand on him, and he felt the presence of God in that place. That man looked at him, he said, I'm going to send you some help. But Shoecraft said he called the man at the church to verify his story before he told it to us there at Athens. He said, in 2 weeks, 70 young people got saved. And that wasn't back in the 30s and the 40s. That was in the 70s. When we thought back in the 70s, it was kind of slowing down a little. But God can move. He moved that church, and he called the pastor. He said the pastor there now is one of those young people that got saved. And he'd lost all his musicians, so he anointed them, young people that God would teach them to play. And they started playing music. He said now their grandchildren's playing music in the church. Praise God. I'll tell you, here I was in a small church needing revival, and God sent me that story. And then I was at another meeting a week or so later at Mount Tabor Camp meeting. I got telling the story about Watts down by South Oklahoma, where Brother Terry Guthrie pastors. I got telling that story in the 40s when it's down to 2 or 3 people. And God sent revival. And one fellow got all excited. He stood up and he said, the thing about it I like about that revival, that's when my mom and dad got saved. Or my grandma and grandpa, whichever way. They got saved in that revival. Oh, yes, because of that revival, I'm here. Oh, and it is another situation. I know that God has turned things around many places. He's able to do it again. But why did I get those stories one after the other in 3 weeks' time? Because I'm in a place, a little church that needs to see God turn it around, and God wants my faith to grow. Why? Because it could be that God is already remembering. That church in Umpire is remembering. Listen, we support 4 missionaries. Maybe God wants that to continue. Oh, yes, God is able to move. Oh, yes, He's able to work and able to move. And God, if God would set us a time, but I'm saying tonight that it's very possible that God has already set the time for things to turn around, and God has already set the time for revival. He's just waiting on us to get in our feet, our condition, and fasting and praying and seeking God, and our faith to grow. And Brother David was preaching this morning, teaches more about faith. We have faith to build. We need to step out on faith and quit doubting. Believe God. Believe God. 7:45 and verse 27, they told him they came in verse 26. They came to the land of Canaan, and Jacob their father told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive. He is governor over all the land of Egypt. Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. They told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him. The spirit of Jacob their father revived. Oh, glory. He said, it's enough. Oh, it's enough. My cup runneth over with joy. Rachel, God will fill your cup. He run it over. He said, hey, this is enough. Look at that, Lord, it's running over. Oh, it's running over. Look at that, folks. My cup's running over. Oh, God can do it. God can run your cup over with joy, great joy. He can run it over. He can give you blessings you give up on. Praise God. When God works, He works in a mighty way. Praise the Lord. I thought of I didn't mention Job. God answered Job. There came a time when Job was praying his prayer, set me a time. And remember me what had happened. And that whirlwind came through and God began to talk to Job. Praise God. Things began to turn around. God turned it around. Praise the Lord. Sometimes we'd like to set the time. That's the problem. I was praying one day, and here's what had happened. The Lord dealt with me one morning. There's a man in our church. I knew him from Georgia for several years. He had a home in Georgia, but he had a home here. And at first, her mother was still alive, and they wasn't pressing that they sell it because they had a place to stay when they go see her. But after she died, they was really needing to get that house sold because they didn't have no reason to go down there. So they prayed about it for about a year or so, and I said, well, we'll help you pray about it. And so they said, you need to do that. We prayed about another year or so there. So finally, one morning, the Lord dealt with my heart. He said, tell Brother Roger, agree with him, that you're going to agree with him that the house will sell this spring. I said, Lord, what if it don't? I mean, maybe I could just slip up to him and say, well, let's agree together. Let's just do this kind of privately. Let's agree. Your house will sell this spring. But that ain't what the Lord told me to do. He said, agree with him. So in front of everybody, I said, Brother Roger, I feel like agreeing with you that your house will sell by spring. He said, okay, I'll do that. Now, Brother Rogers his faith didn't have to go quite as far as mine because he had a person already talking to him about buying a place. But still, it could have fell through. But he didn't tell me he had a person. He just let me sweat it out. He didn't tell me anything. Nothing's going on. But a month or so later, he walked into church. He told me, he said, Brother Steve, I want you to know, house is sold, it's all settled, it's done. I think I run around the church during service a time or two because I was happy that I had missed it, I felt like doing it. But later I was trying to tell the Lord, I said, Lord, let's agree. Maybe I said, my wife, let's agree together that something happened by such and such time. It didn't happen. Well, I said, Lord, he said, you don't get to pick the time. I thought, well, we set a time. God dealt with me about that time. He said, tell him it'll sell by spring. God gave me the time. And so and I thought about that. Is that why our faith suffers so much battering? Because we try to set a time and we don't just wait. When God has spoke to us, I said this morning, sons, about that couple that waited 17 years, but God's promise is coming through. They're now expecting that child that God told them they'd have 17 years ago. So, I don't know. I've wondered about that. Maybe we give up and we pray about something. Sometimes God says no. Sometimes God says wait.
Right.
But God has a time set. When we were in Ohio a few years ago, I don't know. Sometimes you just have to ask God for help. But they was having a really good service, Sunday school. We didn't have no teaching that day because the Spirit of God was moving in that place. There at Victory in Ohio, where my daughter had married into that church there, married a boy from that church, and they were going there at that time. As the Spirit of God was moving in that place, I was sitting back, kind of back like Sister Rayla's now. We're sitting back a ways, and I took Sister Rayla's hand. I said, let's go get prayed for. I went up front. I said, I want the church to pray for us, that God would move in our lives. I really didn't put it together till just recently. In a year or so back, I got to looking back. I'm telling you, sometimes just a little asking for help and letting God's people pray for you. I can point back to a turnaround. God began to help my children, bring them closer to Him, get them back in church better, get them in better situations. God began to move for us and help us and begin to, I didn't really put it together until later. I looked back, I said, really, that goes back to when we stood up and got prayed for. God began to work because we asked Him for help. And He set a time. He had a time set, a time to refresh, a time I'm going to start helping them. I'd give up on some things and God turned them around. And now, my baby girl's a preacher. They're working as youth pastors. They're in Ohio at a different church. And my youngest son has since then started preaching. And his hunger for God makes my soul. He's striving, fasting, praying, wanting more anointing, wanting more of God, trying to follow God, hungry. He talks about, prayer. He's 28, 29 years old. He don't talk like most 28, 29-year-olds. He talks about God. He talks about the things of God. He wants to know, he wants closer to God. He wants more of God. And I've seen God work in my oldest son's life and put him in a church, at least access to a church. He's going to church that's the blessing of God is moving in his whole church. And my other children got moved from Montana where there's nothing into a place where they have a good, strong church. Oh, that's happened since we got prayed for. And that's just part of it with God. Here a while back, I went down, I got my wife's hand. We was at Kellyville. The Spirit of God was moving. And I got my wife's hand, and she said, reckon we should wait till somebody else goes first? I said, no. We need help. We need God to move. So we went up there and the pastor seen me coming, and at first the evangelist kind of went different. He first said, pastors, your wives come down, and he kind of went different direction. Brother David Webb but the pastor seen us, he said, and he got some preachers around and started praying for us. You don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. When you ask God for help, God can turn things around. There's probably a set time. Yeah. God's probably already set a time to remember us, to do some things for us that we've been needing. God's probably already set a time when He's going to work and He's going to move. I tell you, I thought that, I watched Elisha. They prayed for him at the meeting. I watched him, as he sung those songs. And I don't know exactly what God has in plan for his life, but I'm convinced that the hedge is there. I'm convinced that God has that hedge around him. I don't know what God intends to do, but I'm convinced that the hedge is there. Oh, glory to God. Because God has a plan. God has a time. God has a situation. He's working. He's able. Oh, God. But I realized the feeling that was in Job's heart when he said, God, if you just set me a time, then remember, I can just see how jury under somewhere. What I want to preach you tonight, that more than likely, God has got a time set to remember you. He's got a time set to remember this church. He just waited on us to fulfill the promise, the conditions of the promise, because God has those times set. I want to build your hope and your faith that there is a time. And He has set a time. And let's just wait on the Lord. They that wait upon the Lord. Let's stand tonight. Worship God. Shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. Oh, they shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord. You can depend on it. If you're waiting on God, you're in good hands. If you're in the will of God, you're in safety. Safety is in the will of God. There's safety in the will of God. Oh, we worship you, Lord. We worship you, Lord. We worship you, Lord. We worship you, Lord. Let's just gather up around the front. Let's raise our hands and let's worship God. Oh, He's got promises. The promises of God are yea and amen. They're true. God is real. He's true. You know the greatest thing, we had trouble with doubt, but Jesus marveled at their doubt because He knows how big His God was. He knew how big the Father was. He knew what the Father could do, and He marveled. He said, why?